Sometimes the cruelest betrayal isn't a lie whispered in private. It's a truth announced under bright lights for the world to hear. Every crystal chandelier inside the Grand Regency ballroom shimmered like frozen stars suspended above the city. Hundreds of guests filled the room, their designer gowns and tailored tuxedos blending into a sea of wealth, influence, and carefully practiced smiles. The annual Whitmore Global Legacy Gala was more than a charity event. It was a spectacle. Television crews lined the perimeter. Journalists moved between tables with tablets in hand. Massive LED screens glowed on either side of the stage, broadcasting every moment to thousands watching online. At table 12, Amina Brooks Whitmore sat with perfect posture, her hands folded gently in her lap. Her emerald evening gown caught the light whenever she moved, but tonight she barely moved at all. Her eyes remained fixed on the stage where her husband stood beneath the spotlight. Ethan Whitmore looked exactly like the man the business magazines loved to feature. Tall, confident, impossibly composed. At 42, he had built Whitmore Global into one of the largest logistics companies in America. People called him visionary. Investors called him unstoppable. Reporters called him the billionaire who never failed. Amina once called him home. The applause gradually softened as Ethan adjusted the microphone. The giant screen zoomed in on his face. Around the ballroom, conversations faded into silence. Waiters paused beside tables. Cameras tilted upward. Every eye focused on the stage. Ethan offered the audience a practiced smile. "Tonight," he began, his voice smooth and measured, "we celebrate 20 years of growth, innovation, and legacy." Another round of applause rolled through the ballroom. Amina smiled politely. She had attended this event every year since their marriage. Usually Ethan spoke about expansion, partnerships, charitable initiatives, or future investments. Tonight felt different. She noticed it in his posture, in the slight tension around his eyes, in the way he avoided looking directly at her. A feeling she couldn't explain settled quietly in her chest. Ethan continued speaking about the company's history. Screens displayed photographs from earlier years. Warehouses, cargo fleets, corporate milestones. The audience nodded and applauded at familiar moments. Yet Amina felt increasingly disconnected from the celebration around her. Something was coming. She could feel it. Near the front row, Vanessa Cole sat elegantly with her legs crossed. The company's communications director watched Ethan with unusual focus. When their eyes briefly met across the room, Vanessa offered the smallest smile. Amina immediately looked away. The feeling in her chest tightened. Ethan paused. The ballroom became completely still. Even the soft music playing beneath the presentation faded away. The silence felt deliberate, calculated, like the moment before a storm breaks. He took a slow breath. "Success," he said, "means facing reality even when reality is uncomfortable." Several guests exchanged curious glances. Amina felt her fingers tighten slightly against her gown. Ethan stepped forward into the brightest part of the spotlight. The cameras followed instantly. "For years," he continued, "people have asked when I would finally have a child to continue the Whitmore legacy." A few guests laughed softly. Others nodded. It was a question the media asked constantly. Amina's smile disappeared. Ethan's gaze swept across the ballroom. Still, he never looked at her. "I've avoided answering that question publicly." His voice remained calm, professional, detached. "But tonight, I believe honesty matters more than appearances." A strange hush settled over the crowd. Journalists straightened in their seats. Phones slowly rose into the air. Something about the atmosphere shifted. Amina's heartbeat quickened. The giant screens displayed Ethan's face in perfect clarity. He adjusted his cufflink and spoke again. "There will never be a Whitmore heir." A murmur rippled across the room. Ethan waited. Then he delivered the sentence that changed everything. "Because my wife cannot have children." The words landed with the force of a collapsing ceiling. Gasps erupted throughout the ballroom. Someone dropped a champagne glass. Camera flashes exploded from every direction. Reporters immediately began typing. Guests turned toward Amina, so quickly it felt as if the entire room had physically shifted. She didn't move. She couldn't. Her body remained perfectly still while the world around her fractured into whispers. Her ears rang. The spotlight remained fixed on Ethan, but suddenly every gaze belonged to her. Questions spread through the crowd like wildfire. Ethan remained composed. calm, untouched by the shock he had unleashed. Across the room, Vanessa lowered her eyes to hide a smile. Amina felt hundreds of strangers studying her face, waiting for a reaction, waiting for tears, waiting for humiliation. But she gave them nothing. She lifted her chin, drew a slow breath, and sat motionless beneath the weight of their judgment while the cameras continued recording every second. For 3 long seconds, nobody moved. The ballroom remained suspended in a strange silence where even breathing felt too loud. Then the whispers began. They spread from table to table like a current moving through water. Amina could hear fragments floating around her. Poor thing. I had no idea. Is that why they never had children? Did he really just say that on stage? Every word struck her ears with painful clarity. Yet she refused to react. Years of charity galas, board meetings, interviews, and public appearances had taught her one lesson above all others. The more people expected you to break, the more powerful it became to remain standing. Ethan adjusted his jacket and continued speaking as though nothing unusual had happened. Whitmore Global has always been built on transparency, he said. And transparency requires difficult conversations. The giant screens behind him displayed the company logo while cameras continued broadcasting every second. Amina slowly turned her head toward the stage. For the first time that evening, Ethan looked directly at her. The distance between them was less than 50 feet, yet it felt larger than the Atlantic Ocean. There was no apology in his eyes, no hesitation, only calculation, as if this entire moment had been rehearsed long before she entered the ballroom. Her stomach tightened. Around her, guests watched not Ethan but her. They were waiting, waiting for tears, waiting for anger, waiting for humiliation. Instead, Amina rose calmly from her chair. The movement immediately drew attention. Several cameras shifted in her direction. Flashbulbs burst like tiny explosions throughout the room. She smoothed the front of her gown and stood perfectly straight. The spotlight did not reach her table, but somehow every eye found her anyway. Ethan paused. His gaze followed her. The audience fell silent again. "Amina," he said from the stage. His voice carried easily through the ballroom speakers. "You deserve honesty as much as everyone else." The statement landed like ice. Amina felt something inside her finally settle. Not fear, not sadness, clarity. She understood now that this was not an impulsive decision. It was a performance, a public announcement disguised as honesty, a carefully constructed narrative designed to control what happened next. Her expression remained composed. "Honesty," she said quietly. Even from across the room, the microphone near her table captured her voice. "Should never require an audience." A murmur swept through the crowd. Several guests exchanged surprised glances. Ethan's jaw tightened for the briefest moment. It was almost invisible. Almost. Then his practiced smile returned. "Sometimes leadership requires difficult truths," he replied, "even when they make people uncomfortable." Amina held his gaze. Some truths belong to the people living them. For a moment, neither spoke. The tension stretched across the ballroom. Television cameras captured every second. Reporters typed furiously. Somewhere near the back of the room, a champagne cork popped accidentally, startling several guests. Ethan looked away first. "Whitmore Global's future remains secure," he announced. "And I will continue making decisions that protect that future." There it was. Not a husband speaking. Not even a man. A chief executive delivering a corporate statement. The realization hurt more than the announcement itself. 12 years of marriage reduced to a public relations strategy. Amina felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her shoulders, but she refused to lower her head. She began walking toward the nearest exit. Slowly, gracefully, without rushing. The crowd parted as she moved between tables. No one stopped her. No one spoke directly to her. Yet she could feel their sympathy, curiosity, and judgment mixing together in the air around her. The ballroom doors stood less than 30 feet away. Freedom was almost within reach. Then a small voice shattered the silence. "Mommy." The word echoed unexpectedly through the room. Amina froze mid-step. The audience turned as one. Another voice came, louder this time. "Mommy." Near the rear entrance, a little girl slipped free from the hand of an older woman and sprinted into the ballroom. She could not have been older than 6. Her dark curls bounced as she ran. Her small white dress fluttered behind her. Before security could react, she darted between guests and headed directly toward Amina. The entire room watched in disbelief. Cameras immediately swung toward the child. Ethan stared from the stage, confusion replacing confidence for the first time all evening. The little girl reached Amina, wrapped both arms around her waist, and looked up with shining eyes. "Mommy," she whispered again, smiling as though she had finally found someone she had been searching for a very long time. The ballroom seemed to forget how to breathe. Hundreds of guests stared at the small girl clinging to Amina, as if the entire world had tilted beneath their feet. The flashes of cameras became relentless now, bouncing off crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. Reporters rushed to capture every angle. Phones rose higher. Screens across the ballroom displayed the impossible image for everyone to see. Amina looked down at the child in complete confusion. The little girl held on tightly, her small hands gripping the fabric of her gown as though letting go was not an option. Amina searched her face. Warm brown eyes, dark curls, a hopeful smile. Nothing about the child seemed familiar, yet something in the girl's expression carried a strange certainty. "Sweetheart," Amina said gently, kneeling slightly so their eyes could meet. "I think you may have mistaken me for someone else." The girl's smile faltered, only for a second. Then she shook her head firmly. "No, Mommy." A ripple moved through the crowd. Ethan remained frozen on stage. For the first time that evening, he looked completely unprepared. His carefully controlled expression had disappeared. Vanessa sat motionless near the front, her face suddenly pale beneath the ballroom lights. Amina noticed it immediately. Something about Vanessa's reaction felt different from everyone else's. Not surprise, fear. The little girl reached into the pocket of her dress. "You promised," she said softly. "You said you would come back." Amina frowned. "Come back where?" Instead of answering, the child pulled out a folded photograph. The edges were worn from years of handling. She held it up proudly. "See?" Amina accepted the photograph with trembling fingers. Her breath caught. The image showed a younger version of herself, at least 6 or 7 years younger. Her hair was shorter. She wore jeans and a volunteer badge around her neck. Most shocking of all, she was kneeling beside a small child. The same child standing before her now. The ballroom erupted into noise. Journalists immediately surged forward. Questions flew through the air from every direction. "Mrs. Whitmore, is that you? Who is the child? When was the photograph taken? Does Mr. Whitmore know about this?" Security personnel moved quickly to contain the growing chaos. Amina barely heard any of it. Her eyes remained fixed on the photograph. She remembered the volunteer badge. She remembered the building behind her. St. Catherine's Children's Outreach Center. 7 years earlier. Before the board appointments. Before the national charity campaigns. Before life became dominated by corporate schedules and public appearances. She had volunteered there every weekend. Memories began surfacing like pieces of a forgotten dream. Children laughing in playgrounds. Reading stories during afternoon programs. Organizing donation drives. Yet she could not remember this specific little girl. The child pointed to the photograph. "That was the day you gave me the blue bear." Amina blinked. The words unlocked another memory. A toy drive held during winter. Hundreds of donated stuffed animals. One small girl crying because she thought all the toys were gone. Amina had found a blue teddy bear hidden beneath a box and given it to her. The memory flashed briefly before fading again. "Maya." An elderly woman's voice called from across the ballroom. The older woman who had lost hold of the child finally reached them. She looked exhausted and deeply embarrassed. "I am so sorry," she said breathlessly. "She saw you and ran." "Maya." The name settled into Amina's mind. "You know who I am?" Amina asked. The woman hesitated. Around them, cameras continued recording. Every word mattered now. "She has talked about you for years," the woman admitted. "She never forgot you." Ethan slowly stepped away from the podium, his speech abandoned, his gala forgotten. He descended the stage while every guest watched. "What is going on?" he asked. His voice lacked the confidence it carried only minutes earlier. The older woman looked at him, then back at Amina. "There are things you do not know," she said quietly. Things nobody told her. Amina felt her heartbeat quicken. Maya reached for her hand and smiled again. Not the uncertain smile of a child who was confused. The smile of a child who believed she had finally found someone she had been searching for all along. And as Amina looked into those eyes, a chilling realization settled over her. Somewhere inside the missing pieces of her past was a story she had never been allowed to remember. The ballroom no longer resembled a celebration. The elegant music had stopped. Conversations had dissolved into cautious whispers. Even the reporters who normally competed for attention seemed uncertain about what question to ask first. Amina remained standing in the center of the room with Maya's small hand wrapped around hers. The photograph still rested in her fingers. She studied it again, searching for details she had missed. The younger version of herself smiled warmly at the little girl beside her. It was not the smile of someone posing for a publicity campaign. It was genuine, familiar, protective, the kind of smile that came from caring about someone. Yet no matter how hard she searched her memory, she could not understand why this child remembered her so clearly while she remembered almost nothing. The elderly woman gently touched Maya's shoulder. "Perhaps we should leave," she said softly. Maya immediately shook her head. No, her voice was small but determined. She came back. The words sent another ripple through the crowd. Amina knelt until she was eye level with the child. "Maya," she said carefully, "can you tell me what you mean?" Maya's expression brightened as though the answer was obvious. "You promised." "Promised what?" "That you would come get me." Amina felt her breath catch. Around her, phones continued recording. Somewhere near the back of the room, a reporter quietly repeated Maya's words into a microphone. Ethan had reached the edge of the crowd now. His attention remained fixed on the child. The confidence that usually surrounded him had vanished completely. For years, he had controlled boardrooms, negotiations, and public narratives. Tonight, none of those skills seemed useful. "Who exactly are you?" he asked the elderly woman. She looked uncomfortable beneath the weight of hundreds of eyes. "My name is Eleanor Hayes," she answered. "I have cared for Maya since she was 3. Ethan frowned. "And why would she believe my wife is her mother?" Eleanor hesitated. Amina noticed it immediately. The woman was choosing her words carefully. "Because for a very long time," Eleanor said, "that is what Maya believed." Silence followed. Amina's heart pounded. "Believed?" she repeated. Eleanor nodded. When Maya first arrived at the outreach center, she barely spoke. She was frightened, confused. She trusted almost nobody. Maya squeezed Amina's hand tighter. Eleanor continued. "Then she met you." Another fragment of memory surfaced. A small reading room. Colorful books. Children's laughter. A shy little girl sitting alone near a window. The image appeared and vanished before Amina could fully grasp it. "You spent months working with her," Eleanor said. "Every Saturday. Sometimes Sundays too." Amina looked down at Maya. "Months. You taught her how to read simple stories. You helped her paint. You brought her birthday cupcakes when nobody else remembered." The room grew quieter with every sentence. Guests who had arrived expecting a glamorous gala now stood captivated by a completely different story. Amina felt something deep inside her begin to shift. Not recognition exactly, but emotion, the kind that lingers even after memories fade. Maya smiled up at her. "You read the Bear book." Amina blinked. "The Bear book?" Maya nodded enthusiastically. "The blue one. Every week." Another flash appeared. A picture book about a traveling bear. A tiny voice asking her to read one more chapter. Amina closed her eyes briefly. The memory disappeared again, but it had been real. Very real. Across the ballroom, Vanessa suddenly stood from her chair. The movement was abrupt enough to attract attention. "This is inappropriate," she announced. "A private matter involving a child should not be discussed in front of the media." Several heads turned toward her. Amina noticed something strange. Vanessa seemed nervous. Not concerned. Nervous. There was a difference. Ethan noticed it too. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Vanessa," he said, "sit down." She forced a smile. "I am only trying to protect the company. The company is not the issue right now." His voice was colder than before. Vanessa lowered herself back into her seat, but the tension in her face remained. Eleanor watched the exchange carefully. Then she looked at Amina. "There is more," she said quietly. "Much more." Amina felt a chill travel through her chest despite the warm ballroom air. "What do you mean?" Eleanor glanced toward Maya before answering. 7 years ago, something happened at the outreach center. The crowd leaned closer. Cameras zoomed in. Even the reporters stopped typing. Eleanor took a slow breath. "And after it happened, your name disappeared from every record connected to Maya." The words settled over the ballroom like a sudden winter frost. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The only sounds came from camera shutters clicking in rapid succession and the faint hum of the massive screens suspended above the stage. Amina stared at Eleanor, trying to understand what she had just heard. Her name had disappeared from every record connected to Maya. The statement sounded impossible. Records did not simply vanish. Not in a licensed outreach program. Not in a system designed to document every volunteer, every donor, every child. What do you mean disappeared? Amina asked quietly. Eleanor looked toward the floor before lifting her eyes again. I mean exactly that. One day your name was everywhere. The next day it was gone. Maya remained beside Amina, holding her hand with complete trust. The child seemed unaware that every adult in the room was hanging on Eleanor's next words. Ethan folded his arms across his chest. His attention had shifted entirely away from the gala. The shareholders, reporters, and executives no longer mattered. How could that happen, he asked. Eleanor exhaled slowly. At first, I thought it was a clerical error. Then I realized it was not. A murmur traveled through the crowd. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Amina noticed it again. Every time Eleanor revealed something new, Vanessa's posture tightened. Her smile had disappeared long ago. Tell us everything, Amina said. Eleanor nodded. 7 years ago, St. Catherine's received a large private donation, bigger than anything the center had ever received before. New classrooms were built. Staff were hired. Programs expanded. Everyone celebrated. Who made the donation? A reporter suddenly asked from across the room. Eleanor hesitated. The money came through a corporate foundation. Ethan frowned. Which foundation? Eleanor looked directly at him. Whitmore Global Community Outreach. Silence followed. Several heads turned toward Ethan immediately. Even he appeared surprised. That foundation belongs to my company, he said. I know, Eleanor replied. Amina felt a strange sensation creeping through her chest. 7 years ago, the same period when she had volunteered at the center. The same period connected to the photograph. The same period Maya kept referencing. A puzzle was slowly forming, but too many pieces were still missing. What happened after the donation? Amina asked. Eleanor glanced toward Maya and smiled softly before continuing. The center came under new management. Policies changed. Personnel changed. Files were transferred to digital systems. She paused, and shortly afterward, several records became inaccessible. Including mine, Amina said. Eleanor nodded. Including yours. Ethan's expression hardened. Are you suggesting someone intentionally altered records? I am saying that when I searched for your wife's volunteer history, it no longer existed. The ballroom erupted into whispers again. Reporters typed furiously. News alerts were probably already spreading across social media. Amina barely noticed. Her focus remained fixed on Eleanor. Why were you searching for me? She asked. The older woman smiled sadly. Because Maya never stopped asking about you. Maya looked up at Amina. I told them you would come back. Amina felt her throat tighten. There was no accusation in the child's voice. Only faith. Pure and unwavering faith. Every birthday, Eleanor continued. She asked if you were coming. Every Christmas. Every school recital. Every milestone. Maya nodded enthusiastically. I kept the picture. She pointed at the photograph still resting in Amina's hand. So I would not forget. Amina looked down at the image again. The edges were worn because it had been handled hundreds of times. Maybe thousands. Suddenly the photograph felt less like evidence and more like a lifeline a child had refused to let go of. Across the room, Vanessa abruptly stood again. This is ridiculous, she said. Her voice sounded sharper now. An emotional misunderstanding is being turned into a public spectacle. The reaction was immediate. Several guests frowned. Ethan slowly turned toward her. Why are you so determined to stop this conversation? Vanessa blinked. I am trying to protect the company's reputation. No, Ethan said quietly. You are trying to protect something else. For the first time all evening, uncertainty flashed across Vanessa's face. Amina noticed it. So did everyone else. Before Vanessa could respond, Maya tugged gently on Amina's hand. I have something, she whispered. Something you gave me. The child reached beneath the collar of her dress and carefully pulled out a thin silver chain. Hanging from it was a small heart-shaped pendant. Eleanor's eyes widened the moment she saw it. Amina stared at the pendant in shock. Her breath caught, because she recognized it instantly. Years ago, she had owned an identical necklace. One half of a matching set she had not seen in nearly a decade. And suddenly, for the first time that night, A forgotten memory returned with startling clarity. The pendant seemed to pull the air out of the room. Amina stared at the small silver heart resting in Maya's palm while fragments of a forgotten past began slipping through the cracks of her memory. 7 years earlier, during one of the Outreach Center's holiday programs, she had purchased 2 matching pendants from a charity fundraiser. One had remained around her own neck for years. The second had been given away, not to a friend, not to a family member, to a frightened little girl who rarely spoke above a whisper. The memory arrived with startling detail. A rainy afternoon. Children gathered around folding tables covered with crayons and construction paper. A small girl sitting alone near a window, watching the rain slide down the glass. Amina kneeling beside her and offering half of a silver heart. "This way," she had said gently. "You will always know somebody cares about you." Amina's eyes widened. Her hand instinctively moved toward her own necklace. For years she had stopped wearing it, eventually placing it in a jewelry box she rarely opened. Yet she remembered it clearly now. Maya watched her closely. "You remember," the child whispered. Amina swallowed hard. "A little." Maya smiled as though that answer alone was enough to make her happy. Eleanor released a slow breath. "I hope that pendant might help." Around them, the crowd remained captivated. Nobody was thinking about quarterly profits or corporate announcements anymore. The grand ballroom had become something else entirely. A place where a hidden story was slowly finding its voice. Ethan stepped closer. "You really knew her?" he asked Amina. She looked at the photograph, then the pendant, then Maya. "I think I did." The admission carried more weight than she expected. Another memory surfaced. Maya crying after a nightmare. Amina reading stories until she fell asleep. A birthday celebration with cupcakes and paper decorations. The memories were incomplete, like pages torn from a book, but they were real. Very real. "Why do I not remember more?" Amina asked quietly. Eleanor's expression darkened. "That is the question I spent years asking myself." Vanessa suddenly rose from her seat again. "This has gone far enough." Her voice was sharp enough to cut through the room. Several guests turned toward her immediately. "A child remembers a volunteer from years ago. That does not mean there is some conspiracy." Ethan looked at her carefully. "You seem unusually invested in ending this conversation." Vanessa forced a laugh that convinced nobody. "I am invested in protecting the company from unnecessary speculation." "Speculation?" Eleanor replied. "You call missing records speculation?" Vanessa's smile vanished. The tension between the two women was impossible to ignore. Amina noticed something else. Every time Eleanor moved closer to revealing the truth, Vanessa became more anxious. Her hands trembled slightly. Her breathing had become shallow. It was the behavior of someone afraid that a secret might surface. Maya tugged gently on Amina's sleeve. "There is another picture." The child reached into a small bag Eleanor carried and pulled out a worn envelope. Cameras immediately zoomed in. Reporters leaned forward. Maya carefully opened the envelope and removed a second photograph. This one was larger, newer. Amina accepted it slowly. Her pulse quickened the moment she saw the image. The photograph showed the entrance of St. Catherine's Outreach Center. Amina stood near the front steps beside Maya and several staff members. Everyone was smiling. Across the bottom corner was a date stamp. October 14th, 7 years ago. Amina's breath caught. She knew that date, not because of the Outreach Center, because it was the same week she first met Ethan Whitmore. The realization struck her like lightning. She looked up immediately. Ethan's expression mirrored her own surprise. "That was when we met," he said quietly. Amina nodded. The same week. Another memory surfaced. Their first charity dinner. Their first conversation. The beginning of a relationship that eventually led to marriage. Yet somehow, during that same period, an entire chapter involving Maya seemed to disappear from her life. Eleanor looked from Amina to Ethan. 3 weeks after that photograph was taken, she said, everything changed. The room fell silent once more. "What happened?" Amina asked. Eleanor's eyes filled with sadness. "Someone came to the center looking specifically for information about you. After that visit, records disappeared. Staff members stopped answering questions. And before the year ended, your connection to Maya had been erased." The revelation landed harder than anyone expected. Someone had gone to the outreach center looking specifically for Amina, and shortly afterward, every trace of her connection to Maya had vanished. The ballroom fell into a silence so complete that the distant hum of the air conditioning seemed unusually loud. Amina stood motionless, trying to process what Eleanor had just said. 7 years. 7 years of missing answers. 7 years of believing certain chapters of her life had simply faded with time. Now she was beginning to wonder whether they had been taken from her instead. Who came to the center? Ethan asked. His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it. Eleanor shook her head. I never learned the name. I only knew the visitor arrived with authority. The director met privately with that person for nearly 2 hours. And afterward? Amina asked. Afterward, staff members stopped talking about you. Maya looked confused. Why would anyone do that? No one answered immediately. The innocence of the question only made the mystery heavier. Eleanor knelt beside the child and gently brushed a curl from her forehead. That is what we are trying to understand. Amina stared at the second photograph. The date printed in the corner seemed impossible to ignore now. It marked the exact period when her life had begun changing forever. Meeting Ethan had opened doors she never imagined. Their relationship had moved quickly. Charity events became board appointments. Public appearances became international travel. Before long, her weekends volunteering at St. Catherine's disappeared beneath an increasingly demanding schedule. At least that was how she remembered it. Now she was no longer sure. Had she walked away willingly? Or had something happened first? Another memory flickered to life. She saw herself standing outside the outreach center late one afternoon. Maya was crying. Amina had promised something. She could not hear the words clearly. Only the emotion remained. A promise made with absolute sincerity. The memory vanished as quickly as it came. You remembered something, Maya said quietly. Amina looked down. Maybe. Maya smiled. I knew you would. The certainty in the child's voice touched something deep inside her. Across the room, several executives who had arrived expecting a routine gala now stood watching like ordinary people caught inside an extraordinary story. Nobody cared about stock prices anymore. Nobody cared about business announcements. The truth unfolding before them had become far more powerful. Ethan slowly turned toward Vanessa. Did you know anything about St. Catherine's? The question immediately changed the atmosphere. Vanessa blinked. Of course not. The Outreach Center received funding from Whitmore Global. Thousands of organizations receive funding from Whitmore Global. That is not what I asked. Vanessa crossed her arms. Then ask a direct question. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Did you ever have any involvement with St. Catherine's? A brief hesitation followed. It lasted less than a second, but Amina noticed it. So did Eleanor. No, Vanessa answered. Never. Eleanor frowned slightly. That is strange. Vanessa looked toward her immediately. Why? Because I remember seeing someone who looked very much like you there. The room erupted with whispers. Vanessa's face lost color. You are mistaken. Eleanor remained calm. Perhaps. It was years ago. Amina watched the exchange carefully. Every instinct told her something was wrong. Vanessa was usually composed under pressure. Tonight, she looked like someone balancing on unstable ground. Maya tugged on Amina's hand again. There is one more thing. The child reached into the envelope and removed a folded piece of paper. Unlike the photographs, the paper appeared old and fragile. Its edges were yellowed with age. Maya handed it to Amina. I kept it safe. Amina unfolded it slowly. The moment she saw the handwriting, her breath caught. It was hers. There was no doubt about it. She recognized the shape of every letter. The way she curved her capital A. The way she crossed her T's. The note was short. Only 3 sentences. Dear Maya, I have to leave for a little while, but I will come back for you. Be brave, keep reading, and never forget how special you are. Love, Amina. Tears filled Maya's eyes, though she continued smiling. I read it every birthday. Amina stared at the note, unable to look away. She remembered writing it now. Not perfectly, but enough. She remembered sitting at a small desk. She remembered believing she would return within days. Not years. Days. A cold realization settled into her chest. If she had truly intended to come back, then something must have happened that prevented her from doing so. And somewhere in this ballroom, someone might already know exactly what that was. The handwritten note trembled slightly in Amina's fingers. Not because of the air conditioning. Not because of the cameras surrounding her. Because for the first time all evening, she was holding undeniable proof that her memories were not failing her. Someone had interrupted a promise. Someone had stepped between her and a child she clearly cared about. The realization settled heavily inside her chest. Around the ballroom, guests exchanged quiet glances. The mood had shifted again. What began as public humiliation had become something far more unsettling. A missing chapter, a vanished connection, a promise that had never been allowed to be fulfilled. Ethan looked at the note for a long moment. "You never told me about any of this." Amina laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. "How could I tell you about something I do not remember?" Ethan had no answer. Across the room, Vanessa remained unusually silent. Her eyes stayed fixed on the note. Amina noticed her reaction immediately. It was the same look she had worn when Eleanor mentioned missing records. The same look she had worn when the outreach center was discussed. Fear, not concern, not sympathy. Fear. Maya leaned gently against Amina's side. "I knew you would come back." The simple statement almost broke her heart. 7 years. A child had waited 7 years. Amina lowered herself to one knee and smiled softly. "I am sorry it took so long." Maya wrapped her arms around her neck without hesitation. The ballroom fell silent again. Even the reporters seemed reluctant to interrupt the moment. Eleanor brushed away a tear before speaking. "There is something else you should know." Amina slowly stood. "What is it?" Eleanor hesitated. "A few months after your records disappeared, the center received instructions." Ethan frowned. "Instructions from whom?" "Nobody ever said." Eleanor looked uncomfortable. "But staff members were told not to discuss you with Maya anymore." Amina's eyes widened. "Why?" "They claimed it would help her move forward." Maya shook her head immediately. "I never wanted to move forward." Her voice was small, but every microphone in the ballroom captured it. "I wanted my friend." The word struck Amina harder than anything else that night. Not mother. Not volunteer. Friend. A relationship built on trust rather than obligation. She remembered another fragment now. Sitting beside Maya during reading hour. The little girl insisting on sounding out every difficult word herself. Refusing help. Determined to succeed. Amina used to call her brave. The memory lingered longer this time before fading. There were other children at the center. Amina said slowly. "Did their records disappear too?" Eleanor shook her head. "No, only mine. Only yours." A wave of whispers spread through the audience. The implication was impossible to ignore. This had not been an accident. Someone had targeted her specifically. Ethan's expression darkened. Years of corporate negotiations had taught him how to recognize patterns. Missing records. Instructions to remain silent. A child separated from an important figure in her life. None of it sounded random. "Who was the director back then?" he asked. Eleanor answered immediately. "Richard Palmer." Several reporters typed the name at once. Ethan looked toward one of his assistants standing near the stage. "Find him." The assistant nodded and immediately stepped away. Vanessa suddenly stood. "This is becoming absurd." Every head turned toward her. A man retired years ago. Records from nearly a decade ago. Childhood misunderstandings. "We are building a conspiracy out of memories." Her voice sounded sharper than before. Less controlled. Eleanor stared at her. "You seem very eager for everyone to stop asking questions." Vanessa's jaw tightened. "Because there are no answers." "How do you know that?" The question came from Amina. The room became still. Vanessa opened her mouth, but did not immediately respond. For a brief moment, uncertainty crossed her face. It disappeared almost instantly, but Amina saw it. Ethan saw it too. Maya suddenly looked toward the giant screens hanging above the ballroom. "That man." The child pointed. Everyone followed her gaze. One of the television producers had placed an old photograph on the screens for the audience to examine. It showed staff members standing outside St. Catherine's during a fundraising event years earlier. Maya pointed toward a man near the edge of the picture. Eleanor gasped softly. "Richard Palmer." The former director stood smiling beside several donors. But he was not alone. Another person stood only a few feet away. A woman wearing sunglasses and a business suit. The image quality was not perfect, yet the resemblance was unmistakable. The entire ballroom turned toward Vanessa at exactly the same moment. The silence that followed felt heavier than any accusation. Hundreds of eyes shifted from the photograph on the giant screen to Vanessa standing near the front of the ballroom. The image was grainy and nearly a decade old, but the resemblance was impossible to dismiss. The same posture, the same sharp features, the same unmistakable presence. Vanessa stared at the screen for several seconds before forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to her own ears. That could be anyone, she said. A blurry photograph is not evidence. Nobody responded immediately. The room had reached a point where every word mattered. Every reaction mattered even more. Ethan continued studying the image. You said you had never been there. Vanessa crossed her arms. Because I do not remember visiting every charity organization this company has ever supported. That is not what you said, Eleanor replied quietly. You said you had never been involved. Vanessa looked away. The movement lasted only a moment, but Amina noticed it. So did the reporters. Phones rose higher. Cameras zoomed closer. The story was growing larger by the minute. Amina felt Maya's hand tighten around her own. The child sensed the tension even if she did not fully understand it. Why is everyone upset? Maya asked softly. Amina knelt beside her. Because we are trying to understand what happened. Maya nodded thoughtfully. Then maybe this will help. The child looked toward Eleanor. Can I show her? Eleanor hesitated before giving a small nod. Maya immediately reached into her bag again. The crowd watched in complete silence. She pulled out a small notebook with a faded blue cover. Its corners were bent. Several pages were worn from years of use. What is that? Amina asked. My memory book. Maya smiled proudly. Miss Eleanor told me to write things down so I would never forget. Eleanor's eyes softened. After you disappeared from her life, she became afraid of forgetting. Amina felt her chest tighten. Maya carefully opened the notebook and began turning pages. Crayon drawings appeared beside short handwritten sentences. Some pages showed birthdays. Others showed school events. There were sketches of stuffed animals, playgrounds, and storybooks. Then Maya stopped at a page near the middle. This one. Amina looked down. The page contained a drawing of two people holding hands. One was a small child. The other was a woman with dark curly hair. Above the drawing, written in careful block letters, were 6 words. Mommy Amina promised she would return. The ballroom seemed to freeze. Amina stared at the sentence. She knew she had never been Maya's mother. Yet she also understood something important. To a lonely child searching for stability, love often mattered more than labels. Maya had not remembered a volunteer. She had remembered the person who made her feel safe. There are more pages, Maya said. She flipped forward. Nearly every few months, another entry mentioned Amina. Waiting for Amina. Wondering if Amina would come back. Reading the bare book because Amina liked it. Saving the necklace because Amina gave it to her. Year after year. Hope after hope. Amina felt tears gathering in her eyes. Not from sadness alone. From the realization that someone had erased her from records but failed to erase her from a child's heart. Ethan slowly exhaled. The notebook had affected him too. This was not a misunderstanding, he said quietly. No, Eleanor replied. It never was. One of Ethan's assistants suddenly approached from the edge of the ballroom. He carried a tablet and looked unusually serious. Sir. Ethan turned. What is it? We found Richard Palmer. Every conversation stopped instantly. The assistant swallowed. He is alive. Retired in Vermont. Ethan nodded. Get him on the phone. The assistant hesitated. There is something else. Ethan's expression hardened. What? While searching old records, we found archive correspondence connected to the outreach center. Vanessa visibly stiffened. Amina saw it immediately. The assistant continued. Several messages were deleted from company systems years ago, but backups still exist. The ballroom became completely silent. Who sent them? Ethan asked. The assistant looked down at the tablet. The sender was Vanessa Cole. No one moved. No one spoke. The chandeliers glittered above them while the weight of those 4 words settled over the room. Vanessa's face lost all color. Maya looked from one adult to another in confusion. Amina remained perfectly still. For the first time that night, she no longer felt like a victim standing beneath a spotlight. She felt like someone standing at the edge of the truth. And judging by the fear in Vanessa's eyes, that truth was finally beginning to emerge. The accusation hung in the air with startling weight. Vanessa stood perfectly still while dozens of cameras turned toward her. The glow from phone screens reflected across the ballroom like scattered stars, capturing every reaction, every expression, every second of silence. Ethan slowly took the tablet from his assistant and studied the information displayed on the screen. His jaw tightened. How many messages? He asked. 23 recovered so far, the assistant answered. Most were deleted years ago. Vanessa immediately stepped forward. That proves nothing. Her voice was firm, but it no longer carried the confidence that once dominated corporate meetings. Old emails can be misunderstood. Ethan looked up, then explained them. The room became silent once again. Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time all evening, she seemed unable to find the right words. Amina watched carefully. She had known Vanessa for years. They had attended charity functions together, shared conference rooms, smiled for photographs. Yet standing here now, she realized she knew very little about the woman at all. Maya squeezed her hand. Is she the reason you never came back? The innocent question cut through the tension more effectively than any accusation. Vanessa looked at the child. Something flashed across her face. Guilt, regret, fear. A combination of all three. Eleanor noticed it too. Answer her, the older woman said quietly. Vanessa looked away. Ethan scrolled through the recovered messages. One of these emails instructs the center to transfer volunteer records into a restricted archive. Vanessa immediately shook her head. That was administrative. Another requests that inquiries involving Amina Brooks be redirected through a private office. Corporate compliance. Ethan continued reading. Another specifically mentions discouraging contact between Maya and Amina. The ballroom erupted into shocked whispers. Vanessa's shoulders visibly tensed. Amina felt the floor beneath her suddenly seem less stable. Why? She asked. Her voice remained calm, but every person in the room heard the question. Why would anyone do that? Vanessa stared at her for several seconds. You do not understand. Then help me understand. The words landed harder than anger ever could. Amina was not shouting, not accusing. She simply wanted the truth. Vanessa lowered her eyes. It was supposed to protect your future. Confusion spread through the room. Ethan frowned. Protect her from what? Vanessa laughed bitterly. Not from what? From who she was becoming. Nobody spoke. Vanessa took a slow breath. 7 years ago, Ethan was preparing to become the public face of Whitmore Global. Investors were watching everything. Every relationship. Every headline. Every public appearance. Ethan stared at her. What does that have to do with Maya? Nothing. Vanessa's answer came immediately. That was the problem. Amina felt her heartbeat quicken. Vanessa looked directly at her now. You spent every free moment at that center. Every interview became about children. Every event became about outreach programs. Every article described you as a volunteer first and everything else second. And powerful people thought it was distracting. Shock rippled through the audience. Vanessa continued before anyone could interrupt. The company wanted a polished public image. Investors wanted predictability. Advisors believed your growing attachment to the center would pull you away from opportunities that could help the brand. Ethan's face hardened. You erased part of her life for branding? I did not erase anything. Then what did you do? Vanessa looked exhausted suddenly. Older, smaller, less like the woman who controlled media narratives and more like someone carrying a burden for years. I followed instructions. The statement stunned the room. Whose instructions? Amina asked. Vanessa hesitated. Before she could answer, Ethan's assistant approached again. Sir. Everyone turned. We have Richard Palmer on a video call. The giant screens flickered. A moment later, the face of an elderly man appeared before the entire ballroom. His gray hair was thinner now, his expression tired. Yet the instant he saw Amina and Maya standing together, emotion filled his eyes. Thank God, he whispered. The room fell silent. Mr. Palmer, Ethan said, did someone instruct you to remove Amina's records from St. Catherine's? Richard closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, there was no hesitation left. Yes. A collective gasp moved through the crowd. Amina felt Maya's hand tighten around hers. Who? Ethan asked. Richard looked directly into the camera. The request came from Whitmore Global. Every conversation stopped. Every camera remained fixed. Then Richard added the words that changed everything. But it did not come from Vanessa. The entire ballroom seemed to stop at once. Richard Palmer's face remained frozen on the giant screens while his final words echoed through the silence. It did not come from Vanessa. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Ethan stood motionless. Vanessa looked equally stunned. Even the reporters appeared unsure what question to ask next. Amina felt the ground shift beneath every assumption she had formed throughout the evening. If Vanessa had not initiated the request, then someone else inside Whitmore Global had. Someone with authority. Someone powerful enough to influence records, policies, and lives. Richard adjusted his glasses on the screen. His expression carried the weight of years. "I never wanted to stay silent," he said. "But at the time, I believed I was protecting people." Ethan finally found his voice. "Who contacted you?" Richard looked directly into the camera. The instructions came through the office of the Whitmore Family Trust. A ripple of confusion spread through the crowd. Amina frowned. The Whitmore Family Trust operated independently from the company. It managed charitable giving, legacy planning, and long-term family interests. Ethan's expression darkened immediately. "That trust was controlled by my father." Richard nodded slowly. "I know." The ballroom erupted into whispers. Ethan looked genuinely shocked. "My father died 4 years ago. The instructions came before that." Richard lowered his eyes briefly. "Many years before." Amina felt her pulse quicken. She remembered Ethan's father well. Charles Whitmore had been respected, influential, and fiercely protective of the family name. He believed in tradition, legacy, control. The realization settled heavily in her chest. "Why would he do that?" she asked softly. Richard sighed. "Because he was afraid." The answer surprised everyone. "Afraid of what?" Ethan demanded. Richard hesitated. "Afraid that your life was moving in a direction he could not control." The words landed with uncomfortable force. Ethan shook his head. "That makes no sense." It made sense to him. Richard's voice remained calm. "You were being positioned as the future face of the family empire. Every decision was analyzed. Every relationship evaluated. Every public appearance measured." Amina felt sick. "So he wanted me away from the outreach center?" "No." Richard looked directly at her. "He wanted you away from Maya." Silence fell again. Maya looked up, confused. "Why?" Richard smiled sadly at the child. "Because he believed you would change Amina's future." Tears formed in Eleanor's eyes. She had waited years for these answers. Amina struggled to process what she was hearing. "I was helping children." "I know." Maya was 6 years old. "I know." Richard nodded. "But Charles Whitmore believed your growing commitment to the center would eventually lead you away from the life he imagined for his son and his family." Ethan stared at the screen in disbelief. "He never told me any of this." "Because he knew you would not approve." Another silence followed. This one felt different. Heavier. More personal. Amina suddenly remembered a conversation from years ago. Charles Whitmore sitting across from her at a charity dinner, complimenting her intelligence, praising her dedication, then casually suggesting that some causes required too much emotional investment. At the time, she thought little of it. Now the memory felt entirely different. Maya tugged gently on Amina's hand. "You did not leave because you wanted to?" Amina looked down at her. Her heart ached. "No, sweetheart." Maya's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled through them. "I knew it." The simple certainty nearly broke Amina. Across the room, Vanessa slowly sat down. For the first time all evening, some of the tension left her shoulders. Not because she was relieved, because she looked exhausted. Years of carrying secrets had clearly taken their toll. Ethan turned back toward the screen. "If my father ordered this, why did Vanessa send the messages?" Richard answered immediately. "Because she was assigned to execute the transition plan." Vanessa closed her eyes. "I tried to soften it." The room turned toward her. "I could not stop it," she admitted quietly. "But I tried to make sure Maya remained supported." Eleanor nodded reluctantly. "That part is true." Amina stared at Vanessa in surprise. The woman she had viewed as an enemy all night suddenly looked far more complicated. Flawed. Responsible. Yet not entirely malicious. Ethan looked at both women before turning back to Richard. "Is that everything?" Richard hesitated. The hesitation instantly changed the atmosphere again. "No," he said quietly. "There is one more truth." The ballroom became silent. Richard's expression grew solemn. The records they removed were not the only files connected to Amina that disappeared 7 years ago. The words settled over the ballroom with quiet force. The records they removed were not the only files connected to Amina that disappeared 7 years ago. Every conversation stopped. Every camera remained fixed on the giant screens where Richard Palmer's face filled the room. Amina felt Maya move closer beside her. The child seemed to understand that something important was about to be revealed. Ethan stood motionless. His expression had changed completely from the confident executive who began the evening. Now he looked like a man confronting pieces of his own history for the first time. "What other files?" he asked. Richard lowered his eyes briefly before answering. "Medical records." The reaction was immediate. Gasps spread through the crowd. Reporters exchanged startled looks. Amina felt her stomach tighten. Medical records. The phrase carried a weight that instantly transported her back to years of doctor appointments, consultations, tests, and painful conversations. What medical records? She asked quietly. Richard hesitated. Records connected to your fertility evaluations. The ballroom fell silent once again. Ethan slowly turned toward Amina. A dozen memories surfaced between them at once. The specialists, the private meetings, the disappointment, the conversations that became increasingly difficult as the years passed. Amina swallowed hard. Those records were confidential. Richard nodded. They should have remained confidential. How do you know they disappeared? Ethan asked. Richard exhaled slowly. Because I saw correspondence referencing them. Vanessa looked up sharply. What correspondence? Richard answered without hesitation. Documents connected to the Whitmore family trust. Ethan's expression darkened. My father had access to our medical information? Apparently more than access. The statement sent another wave of whispers through the room. Amina felt cold despite the warmth of the ballroom. She remembered the day she received her diagnosis years ago. The doctor explaining that conceiving naturally would be extremely difficult. The uncertainty, the grief, the feeling that part of her future had suddenly become fragile. She remembered Ethan holding her hand afterward. She remembered believing that some burdens belonged only to the two of them. Now she was discovering that other people had been involved long before she realized it. There is more, Richard said softly. The room became still again. The records that disappeared were not simply archived. Ethan frowned. What are you saying? Richard looked directly into the camera. The files were altered. The ballroom erupted. Questions flew from every direction. Reporters began speaking over one another. Camera flashes lit the room like bursts of lightning. Ethan raised his hand sharply. The room gradually quieted. Altered how? Richard's expression was solemn. I never saw the final versions. I only saw references indicating that information had been modified before distribution. Amina felt her pulse racing. Modified by whom? Richard shook his head. I do not know. Vanessa suddenly stood. I do. The room froze. Every eye turned toward her. Even Richard looked surprised. Vanessa looked exhausted. Years of carefully controlled professionalism seemed to collapse at once. I found the files. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Several years ago. Ethan stared at her. You never told me. I was afraid. Afraid of what? Vanessa looked directly at Amina. Afraid of what the truth would do to your marriage. Silence followed. Maya held tightly to Amina's hand. Eleanor stood nearby, watching carefully. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Vanessa reached into her handbag and removed a thin folder. The motion seemed impossibly ordinary compared to the magnitude of the moment. I kept copies. A collective gasp spread through the ballroom. Ethan looked stunned. You have them? Vanessa nodded. I never knew whether I should destroy them or reveal them. Amina stared at the folder. Her entire future seemed to rest inside a collection of papers. Vanessa stepped forward slowly and extended the file toward Ethan. I think they belong to both of you. Ethan accepted the folder with trembling hands. For several seconds, he simply stared at it. Then he opened it. The ballroom became completely silent. He read the first page, then the second, then a third. The color drained from his face. Amina had never seen Ethan Whitmore look afraid before. Not once in 12 years. Not during financial crises. Not during public scandals. Not during difficult negotiations. But she saw it now. Genuine fear. Genuine shock. Ethan looked up slowly. His eyes found Amina's. For a moment, he seemed unable to speak. When he finally did, his voice barely carried across the room. Amina, he whispered. The records were not changed to hide your condition. The words seemed to echo forever inside the ballroom. Amina stared at Ethan while the silence stretched between them. Around them, hundreds of guests remained frozen beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers and television lights. Nobody cared about the gala anymore. Nobody cared about the company anniversary. Every person in the room was waiting for the truth. Ethan lowered his eyes to the folder again. His hands trembled. The records were not changed to hide your condition, he repeated. They were changed to hide mine. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Amina felt the world tilt slightly beneath her feet. For years, she had carried the weight of a diagnosis she believed belonged to her. Years of private disappointment. Years of wondering whether she had somehow failed. Years of allowing strangers, relatives, and even herself to believe she was the reason their family never grew. Ethan swallowed hard. The original reports show that your doctors never concluded you were infertile. His voice cracked. They recommended further evaluation. Tears filled Amina's eyes. And you? Ethan looked down. The final assessment identified me as the patient facing the greater challenge. The ballroom remained silent. No whispers. No movement. Just truth. Raw and undeniable. Vanessa lowered her head. Eleanor closed her eyes. Maya looked from one adult to another, trying to understand why everyone suddenly seemed emotional. Ethan took a slow breath. My father received the reports before I did. Amina felt her heart sink. Richard Palmer's face remained visible on the giant screens. He nodded slowly. That is true. Ethan looked at the crowd, then back at Amina. He believed the Whitmore name depended on an heir. He believed public perception mattered more than honesty. Pain filled his expression, and he convinced me that protecting the family required silence. Amina remembered every conversation, every specialist, every uncomfortable dinner, every moment she quietly accepted responsibility because she thought the medical evidence pointed toward her. Now those memories felt different, not because they hurt less, because they had been built on a lie. You knew? She asked softly. Ethan closed his eyes. Not at first. The answer surprised her. But eventually, yes. The confession landed heavily. And you never told me. Ethan looked directly at her. I was ashamed. The billionaire who controlled billion-dollar negotiations suddenly sounded like a lost man. Then the lie grew larger. Every year it became harder to tell the truth. Tears rolled down Amina's cheeks, but her voice remained steady. So tonight you stood on that stage and embarrassed me in front of the entire world. Ethan lowered his head. Yes. Why? For a moment he seemed unable to answer. Then he spoke. Because I learned about the files this morning. Confusion crossed the room. Ethan continued. I discovered the records. The altered reports. The messages. Everything. He looked devastated. And instead of facing the truth, I panicked. Amina stared at him. You panicked? I thought if I controlled the story, I could survive it. A bitter smile touched his lips. I forgot that the truth always arrives eventually. Maya squeezed Amina's hand. The small gesture grounded her. She looked down at the child who had unknowingly carried the truth longer than any adult in the room. Maya never cared about inheritance, never cared about family trusts or corporate reputations. She only remembered kindness, a promise, a friendship. Amina knelt beside her. Thank you. Maya blinked. For what? For finding me. The child smiled. I told everyone you would remember. Amina laughed softly through her tears. You were right. Across the ballroom, guests slowly began standing. Not because anyone asked them to, because they had witnessed something rare. A woman refusing to break, a child refusing to forget, and a truth finally stepping into the light. Ethan took a hesitant step forward. Amina. She looked at him. I cannot change what happened. His voice was quiet. I cannot undo 12 years of silence. He paused. But I am sorry. The apology hung in the air. Simple. Unpolished. Human. Amina studied him for several seconds. Then she nodded once. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. Simply acknowledgement. Some wounds needed more than words. She rose to her feet and gently took Maya's hand. The giant screens followed her movement. Cameras followed too. Yet for the first time that evening, the attention no longer felt like judgment. It felt like witness. Amina walked toward the ballroom doors. Maya stayed beside her. Eleanor followed a few steps behind. Nobody tried to stop them. Near the exit, Amina paused briefly and looked back. Ethan remained standing beneath the bright stage lights where he had begun the evening believing he controlled the narrative. Now the spotlight revealed something entirely different. Not power, not wealth, consequences. Then Amina turned away. Together, she and Maya stepped through the doors and into the quiet night beyond the ballroom. And for the first time in 7 years, neither of them was walking alone.